Um, so, like I said before, if you came to the webinar for how to easily get guest spots on podcasts, you are in the right place. And let's dive in. So let me make sure that we're recording. One sec. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. As we get started, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to use the Q&A section or the chat widget here, and we will get your questions answered as soon as we can. All right. And let's share our screen. Great. So today we're going to be talking all about landing guest spots on podcasts. Let me hit record and we'll get started. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us for this webinar today. I'm excited to share with you how to get guest spots on podcasts. Joining me today is my co-host Belle, who has had some really amazing success with getting podcast guest spots. I thought I was doing pretty good, and then I saw what she was doing, and I'm like, oh, I need to get you on a podcast because this is just crushing it. So quick shout out. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the audience. Let me know where you're coming from today. I'm based here in New York. Belle, you're in.
I'm in Buenos Aires of all places, guys. So that's really good weather, really good steak, really good wine. So I'm living life. But I'm in quarantine right now, so it's not that great for me. I just get my steak delivered, basically.
Oh, okay.
That's good.
All right.
Oh, nice. We got
All right.
someone from Uruguay. Ah, our next door neighbors. Love people from Uruguay. It's like Uruguay is Argentina done well with nicer people, basically. That's what. And I imagine that's the same way Australians feel about New Zealanders. They're just better.
Just learn something new. Okay.
Definitely, Uruguayans are the best people.
Uruguayans are the best people.
Best people.
Okay. Good to know. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Marco, thanks for joining us from Ukraine. Awesome. Well, so quick housekeeping. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask them in the chat. And today we are talking about getting guest spots on podcasts. If you don't see my screen for any reason, let us know, but you should see it now. Quick intro about who we are talking to you today, all about getting guest spots on podcasts. My name is Andy Cabasso. I am a co-founder at Postaga. Before starting Postaga, I ran and then eventually sold a successful digital marketing agency. I'm also a licensed attorney here in New York, even though I'm not practicing and haven't practiced in many years. But that's just a fun fact about me. And also 2 weeks ago, I officiated a friend's wedding, and that was a great time.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
How did that go?
It went well. So it was my fourth wedding that I performed. So I feel like I've got a good rhythm for it now.
Are you like an entertainer type of officiator, or is it that?
There are jokes. It's not like completely jokey, but like there's a right mixture of being
Balance.
serious. Yeah, because you need people to take you seriously especially if you're like not clergy, you're like a friend of the couple. So yeah, finding the right balance is important.
That's phenomenal. All right, so I'm Belle Di Lorenzo. I'm here in Buenos Aires in Argentina. I'm right now the CMO at Startup Sauce. It's a private exclusive community for SaaS founders outside of Silicon Valley, and he's one of our most treasured members in the academy. We really love him, and I'm a big number one fan of Postaga right here. That's something I should have added. I
Thanks.
love the product since I started using it. Well, I've always been a content marketer, always work with freelancing, link builders, a link building team, and we've always had issues in every company that I worked for. We'd had trouble with link building, and then I found Postaga, and it really changed my life as a marketer because I was able to sort of do things myself
Mhm.
with it kind of automated the stuff that I needed automated. It was fantastic. So, and also I used to be an Indian graphic designer, and this is an interesting story. Back a few years ago, I needed some extra cash. I was a content marketer. I was working with a lot of freelancers. I was using a site called Fiverr, which is like Upwork. So I said, look, I need some more cash. Why don't I just hire myself? So I created a fake Indian profile, looked for the most common name in India, most common last name in India. And by day, I was content marketer Bell. And by night, I was Milana Chakra from India, graphic designer. And so I had to leave a paper trail of me talking to Milana and saying, hey, I don't really like this part of the design. Could you change this? Like, yeah, of course, Belle, I'll change this. And yeah, it was just a lot of conversations with myself, just like in high school. So yeah, it was great.
Fun. Great, cool. So today, here's what we're going to talk about. So first thing we're going to talk about, like why we're talking about podcast outreach today. We'll talk about prospecting and what to do in terms of like trying to find the best fit podcast to reach out to. We'll talk about the pitch because I think that's what really separates everything. Just like any cold outreach, it's really all about the pitch. We're going to talk about what to expect and what are typical results and not so typical results to give you some ideas, maybe some benchmarks to see what you can be doing better and improving on. I don't expect you to have Bell's reply rate. I don't, but I'm happy to share about that. Some mistakes that people make. And once you've secured a guest spot, how to have a good appearance. And then at the end, we'll do a Q&A. So let's talk about why podcast. So we have a few kind of overarching main reasons of why to do podcast outreach. Kind of the main reason that I first was looking into podcast guest appearances is because every time you appear on a podcast, on their website in the show notes, they will link to your website. And so that ends up being a link back to your site. And that's usually a good quality backlink. That's a nice, straightforward win. And if you've ever done like other types of outreach, like skyscraper technique or anything else, like there can be negotiations. People could be asking for money. It could be tough to get like good responses, but I've found getting it's compared to other areas, it's a much better response rate and it's easier to build links that way. Another thing is, reaching a new relevant audience. And this is something that I was thinking about. I've been asked before, like, what should, like, if I'm doing digital marketing, should I reach out to other digital marketing podcasts? And like, my thought was kind of like, well, maybe, but also maybe not, because you don't want to reach out to podcasts where they're covering the stuff that you are speaking about. You want to go to where your potential customers are.
Exactly. So podcast with a similar audience, but a different topic, a different offer.
Right. Especially because like depending on what your target niche is, the podcast host, you hopefully want to find a podcast host that doesn't have the expertise in your area, and so you can offer something for their audience. If you're a digital marketer and you pitch to digital marketing podcasts, then you better have some good case study and something that separates you from every other digital marketer. But if you do digital marketing for lawyers or for healthcare, you can reach out to lawyer podcasts or healthcare podcasts, and you could connect with people who will hopefully want to hire your company and use your services, as opposed to just you being on a podcast that like where the audience are people who are possibly competitors of yours. So that's a tip for that. High success rate. Belle, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about podcasts is what you said, Andy. It's much easier to get a positive response from them because you're offering them free content, right? Basically, they get some really good content for their podcast, for their audience, So they're very likely to say yes if you build a proper pitch, which we'll talk about later. So it's much easier than asking for a link without much to offer in return. You obviously always want to offer something in return, but this providing your expertise, and obviously if you pitch yourself correctly, has really good. It's been really my most successful campaign, the podcast campaign. So it's great.
Yeah, for sure. Same. Yeah, as far as any of the campaigns go,
Yeah.
like the reply rate that I've gotten from podcasts and like the links landed and all of that, it's been better for podcast than anything else.
Podcasters are always looking for content, for interesting people to get in the show. So
yeah. Also, so don't tell anyone. This is just between us webinar attendees for now, at least. I find that like with podcasts, one like reason that I think it's so successful is because it's not as competitive, like in part because I think there are some barriers to entry. Like if you want to go on a podcast, typically the podcaster wants you to have a good microphone. They want you to have something unique, a story to tell, something that you could speak eloquently about. Often they want to see that you have done an appearance before, that at least for the more established podcasts. So if you're working on behalf of some company, you need to have someone from the team available to be on that podcast. And so if you're like a freelance marketer, like you can easily do different kinds of link building techniques, but podcasts in particular, that company, a representative from the company needs to be available to be on the podcast. So it's a little bit more work, but ultimately, like we were saying, it's a very high success rate. And
this one's
building
really good.
credibility. Yeah, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, building credibility and authority. That was a big thing for us. We kind of wanted the CEO of this company that I'll refer to a lot, it's a translations company. We wanted to build his image, particularly in the language space. So basically, the more podcasts you're into, obviously, the more search results will also be in subsequently, because they'll place the link for you in their show notes. Usually, they have, as we said, you'll have the show notes, but you'll also have, usually each podcast page has a page per episode as well. So the more you can have your name out there, the better. And it's usually a double effect, because some podcasts, depending on how big they are, they have the main page with all the episodes where you're named, and then the specific page of the episode where you're named as well. So you have two. You may build actually 2 or 3 links with one podcast appearance, but most importantly, you will build authority and credibility. In this case, it was particularly important for us because this guy had the same name or a very similar name to a serial killer or something. So every time someone looked his name up, the serial killer would appear. So we needed to sort of build credibility and sort of change that Google results. And actually, we've been trying to do that for years. And then when we started with the podcast campaign, we got so many links and appearances that changed completely. So that was.
I'm sorry, what?
Yes, I may be overreacting on the degree of the
so
delinquency.
If you search for the CEO's name, does the Google Knowledge Graph show up with a picture of the?
So yeah, the Wikipedia page of the guy you would get. Yeah, it was not great. So we needed to build a campaign. Yeah,
that's something. Right now I'm feeling pretty blessed that my name is uncommon and it's all me when you search for my name. Okay, good to know. Wow. All right. And maybe some advice for any would-be parents in the audience: give your kid a unique name and Google it beforehand. But that's something for us to. Wow. All right, let's keep going. Building a relationship with a potential partner. You've had a lot of success with this?
That happened to us with this campaign as well. We got a really good, so because of the nature, I didn't know how competitive this was going to be. I didn't know if podcast was going to be super competitive. So obviously I didn't want to go after other translations podcast. So I thought,
Mhm.
okay, what can we go after? And so one of them had so I started going to language podcasts. So people that
Mhm.
wanted to learn languages, people that were teaching languages. There's a lot of podcasts for polyglots out there. And
Mhm.
one of them was actually an international student exchange program podcast. And so when he appeared on that podcast, I sort of kept talking to the person that sort of referred me for the podcast. And we kept talking and talking and back and forth emails. We then realized that we could potentially build a really good partnership because we could provide because every student kind of needs all of their their academic scores translated in
Mhm.
order to move abroad, and a bunch of legal papers translated. So we said, hey, we can give you a special prize for your people, and we ended up building a successful partnership out
Mhm.
of that podcast. But that's the cool thing about something that I've only really found with Postdoc and when it comes to
Yeah.
link building. When you're reaching out to so many people, this kind of stuff happens. It's not really so much about building links for me. It's about building a relationship, because
Mhm.
links will happen. There's a point where when when you build a relationship, links is going to be the easiest thing to build, but you can
Mhm.
build something much bigger. You can get interviews, you can get podcasts, you can get it's really that was a
Yeah.
really good result.
Absolutely. Like, yeah, like a bunch of people that I've like connected with in the past, or like I connected with for like either like a guest post or something like that, have been like future opportunities to work together in the future. They've
Yeah,
referred people my way. With podcasts, I think you had recommended to me like a while ago, like, well,
yeah,
are you like giving like a coupon to the audience, like, or anything like that? Because like throw in an offer and like that's affiliate revenue for the podcaster, and that you're already going to plug your business, might as well give an incentive for them to promote it further. And like that was like, oh wow, I really got to do that. And so I do that with every podcast I do now, make like a special coupon code for that podcast.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
um, so
And that's something
that's
that's just for me to brag. That's why I threw it out.
please go ahead and brag.
Well, that was one of our campaigns. But I think that was my first podcast campaign with Postaga. But it's really I'm just bragging about Postaga, so it's not really about it's not so much my success. Um, this was a campaign I tagged it entrepreneurship. So you'll see podcast
Mhm.
campaign tag entrepreneurship, because I was reaching out to entrepreneurship business,
Mhm.
first time business owners podcasts, because he was a business owner. So we got a really high success rate there.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you the templates later. So it was
Yeah.
I think there was one specific thing that worked, and I'll tell you later why.
Yeah. Like, so, yeah. So what Bell was saying, like we were talking about earlier, that high success rate, like I was seeing like a 20% response and success rate. And I was thinking, oh, wow, this is really, really good. And then Bell's like, hey, I got a 34% response rate. Just tried this out. And I'm like, well, what are you doing that I'm not doing? And Bell will share her email template. I'll share mine with you. And
Yeah,
we'll see why hers is like, why mine isn't bad, but hers is more creative than mine.
thank you.
Um, so now let's talk about prospecting. So for finding podcasts and reaching out to them, generally, I'm going to recommend using Postaga. Um, but it's in terms of like finding podcasts, it's easy to do. You launch a podcast campaign, enter in a search keyword, and Postaga will automatically find relevant podcasts for you and find the right contact people so you can pitch them. But there are some things that are also good to know for doing your podcast prospecting. A few main things. One is making sure that the podcasts are still active. There is a graveyard filled with podcasts that have a handful of episodes. I think some podcaster told me once, and I have no idea if it's true, but it sounds good. It's like they're like the average podcast has 4 episodes or something like that. Um, and I'm
Yeah,
like, huh. I have no idea if that's actually true, but that sounds interesting and that sounds good. So I'm going to keep telling people that until I'm proven otherwise. But when you're reaching out to podcasts, you want to make sure that the podcasts that you're reaching out to have recently published an episode and are still actively publishing. One thing that's built into Postaga is making sure that an episode has been published of the podcast in the last, I believe it's 3 months. And if not, we let you know. Like separately, these are quote unquote inactive podcasts, because in my earliest days of doing podcast outreach, I targeted a wide net and we didn't have that feature yet. And I would get some replies that were like, I haven't created a new episode of this podcast since 2018. And it's like, all right, well, that was a waste of everyone's time. Sorry.
So that's really cool. It's a really cool feature.
And also generally more than a few episodes. In general, like I have found that the more established the podcast is, the more smoothly things are going to run. If they have 50 episodes or 40 episodes, chances are they've got a rhythm for things. They have a good guest questionnaire. They'll get you invited and set up properly, and hopefully they have a decent audience. But if it's like less than 10 episodes, chances are they're still figuring out the format and things like that.
On the other hand, I have found with bigger podcasts that sometimes because they're so busy and they have so many guests, they will push you around sometimes. Okay, no, next month, all right, we can do it. Maybe that week. Oh, can you do it actually on the week before? Okay, all right. With smaller ones, we've had people that were like, no, yeah, let's do it this day, this time. And that has gone really smoothly. So yeah.
For sure. Like my biggest quantity of podcasts have come from the smaller podcasts, the newer ones, because they're really looking for guests and very open and accepting. The more established podcasts, especially if it's like a bigger name podcast, they may have their own people, or like their own producer who finds people, or the guests are already known to the host. So it can be harder to get in on those. And then of course there are like the elite level podcasts, like the Tim Ferriss podcasts, things like that, the Joe Rogan podcast, that although you can prospect them, there is basically no chance that you're going to get picked for those.
Yeah, but you are sort of building a reputation. So if you're starting from from nothing, it's really good to go after those that are a little bit smaller, and then build yourself up, because that way, if you do a few smaller ones, you have that to show for when you're pitching to the bigger ones, and that will happen naturally. But yeah, once we build a proper proper file with all the previous ones we had, that's when we were able to pitch successfully to bigger ones. It was really good.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, for sure. Like the first few podcasts I was on, I was like they were smaller podcasts, but like, this is something I'm going to mention. I don't want to forget, but one pro tip, when you are on a podcast, podcasters are friends with other podcasters. Like it's very common for podcasters to do podcast swaps. So after you go on a podcast towards the end, I ask this of every podcast I'm on: do you know anyone else who you think I would be a good fit for, a good guest for? Anyone that you could make an introduction for me with? And podcasters are they're very happy to do that. Like their friends are looking for guests, and if they were happy with how you did, they'd be happy to introduce you. And like, that's been like
that's a great tip, man. Oh,
I need to write this down, because I'm gonna put this in the notes for this podcast, for this afterwards.
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna start using that.
All right, questions about how to pitch for a podcast? We're gonna get to that right now. So for the pitch, there are different ways that you can go about it. You could be hyper specific for every single podcast that you pitch, where you research that podcast and know exactly like all the content that they've kind of published and have a very specific pitch for them. Or what I typically do is I find a bunch of podcasts in a particular niche or space, and I have basically the same kind of pitch for all of them, so I don't have to start from scratch for all of these. In particular, it's better if you can like have a specific topic that they haven't covered before, as well as like, so the kind of the two main things of the pitch are, what are you going to talk about and what is the value that you are going to bring? Like, you may be qualified to talk about this subject matter, like you're an expert on topic or whatever, but what value is it going to bring for the audience, and why you? And this is something that's like very important, because I was speaking with a podcaster once, like I was just picking his brain, like, do you get pitched a lot? And he's like, yeah, I get pitched by a lot of PR agencies working for people, and their pitches are often very much like, I would like to have this person from this company be a guest in your podcast. He is a Harvard Business School graduate and runs this company. And it's like, you're telling me about the guest, and that's okay, but why should my audience care?
Exactly.
And what value are you going to provide for them? So like in my pitch, I try and structure it as, first, here are my ideas for topics that are relevant to your audience. And hopefully if I've structured it right, like one of those is going to get your attention. I've also had situations where the host like replies and says, I appreciate this pitch. It's very thorough. I don't love those topics. Do you have any other ideas in mind? And that's a really great response to get too, because they didn't just dismiss you outright. But then after that, I try and like show like, here is why I'm qualified to speak on this. And also having kind of like something that's good for any kind of outreach pitch you're doing is having an offer or sweetener, offering to share the podcast episode with your audience of social followers or your email list and things like that.
So it's really interesting what you say. It's for example, what we did in terms of when we were pitching, right? The actual templates that I'm going to show you, I didn't know all of this. I think this is a much better way to do it, and giving them as much information as they can to make their jobs easier, especially if they're a bigger podcast. They want you to put as much effort in the pitch as you can. They know they're getting pitched. They know they need guests anyway, so that's okay. Give them as much as you can. So for example, what Andy was saying, just give them the topics already that you can talk on. Give them some questions. Sometimes, for example, okay, some people have asked me, what sort of questions would you like me to ask your CEO? Well, this. But it's much better if you can put that already in the pitch. He can talk very confidently about these topics, and this is why your audience would like that. And so, for example, on our campaign much later, I did a campaign for this language podcast. And what we said was, so he's the CEO for a translations agency. I'm pretty sure your audience that's learning languages could really get into that world and into that space of being interpreters, being translators. So that's the cool thing about not reaching out to your competitors, is that because you're reaching out to people with a similar audience, but with a different offering, you can offer them something unique as a guest in their podcast.
One other thing to mention is like, is there something new that you have to offer, like a new perspective that you can bring specifically for that audience? Like we were talking about earlier, like you could be an expert on digital marketing for an industry or something like that, and have something unique to share for that market that hasn't been on the podcast before, or a completely radical different approach. I have a few go-to topic pitches that I pitch most of the podcasts that I reach out to, because I'm like, I know this topic cold. I can speak, like, if I just look at my calendar, I'm like, oh no, I have a podcast appearance in 10 minutes, I can comfortably jump on that podcast and speak about the topic. But also, like, I have a frame for what I want to talk about that is unique to me, that I think I can speak about this topic in a way that other guests can't. And so that's going to hopefully make me stand out. Like, if I'm reaching out to digital marketing podcasts, let's say, they probably get a lot of pitches about SEO. Well, great, but what is it that you have unique to offer?
Yeah.
What's your unique take?
And when you're going after more generic, keywords when it comes to podcasts, for example, entrepreneurship, that's a big one. Okay, so this podcast usually will have a lot of entrepreneurs in their show, right? That's when you want to pitch your story. So, for example, I have a very unique story that happened to me about this and this and this and this, and that's something your listeners will really like. So maybe it's not a topic per se in what they can learn, but an interesting story, depending on the type of podcast you're reaching out to. But for example, for entrepreneurs, something that really worked was, hey, he has this really interesting story that about this and this and this, and I think your listeners would love it. That's also a way that you can stand out as a guest.
So next up, also important with the pitch is you may have this great initial email that lays out everything from, hey, here is why I would be a good guest in this podcast. Please, what do you think? And that's it. And if they don't get back to you, then what happens? You must have a follow-up. And my follow-up is usually it's like one line. It's, hey, just want to follow up and see what you thought, just to like ping them and remind them. I don't need to regurgitate everything that was in my first email because they have it. It's in our thread conversation, but I'm just trying to remind them to get back to me on this. And that follow-up is important. It'll often get you that reply and they'll apologize. Oh, sorry, I didn't see this. Let's talk. But having at least one reply, maybe two, increases your overall reply and success rate for your campaign.
Yeah, I've actually started adding a third step to my sequence for podcasting to follow up with them one more time, because I found that a lot of people answered on the second email.
So here is, we're going to now share some of our templates. First, I'll share with you mine, which is decent. I mean, I think it's good. Bell's is better, but I want to break down why it works. So like first, like my subject line, podcast guest ? It kind of suggests to them what this is all about. Also, it adds a little bit of mystery to it because I don't have the entire pitch or anything like that in the subject line, like podcast guest to talk about X topic or something like that. It generates curiosity and it makes them more likely to open the email. First line, hey, person's name. It's important if you can find it to use the contact person's first name, so that you can demonstrate that you know what their podcast is and what they're about. So like this first line is something that I tinkered with for a while. I've seen pitches where the first line is like, where it's like, I love your podcast, and actually Bell is something.
Mine says that.
Effect.
Hey, mine says something like that. Wait, keep going.
Yours says something like that, but yours works. I've seen pitches where it's like, hey, I love your podcast. Are you open to a guest slot? And I've spoken with some podcasters about this, and they're like, yeah, like that's a very common like first line. And so like, I'm like, all right, I've seen this pitch before. I know that you haven't like listened to an episode, especially because you haven't demonstrated that you know anything about it. So I'm going to be skeptical right off the bat. So my approach is, your podcast was recommended to me. So I admit that I haven't listened to it yet, but I am going to check it out.
That's really
And
good.
so that I feel like that starts me from a position of a little more authenticity here, and it's a more kind of unique. But I also mentioned the podcast by name in this line, so they know, or they know that I know what their podcast is. It's also, so that's important for the personalization.
I like that.
Then I ask, are you open for a guest slot in the next month or so? Trying to keep it low stakes here, like in the next month or so. So doesn't have to be this week, doesn't have to be tomorrow. Are you scheduling out? And most of the podcasts that I've gotten on, typically like it's usually like 2 to 3 weeks out that I end up being on the podcast.
Yeah.
Some of them end up being months later, and it's fine, but just kind of like being upfront about what I'm looking for. And so then next up, here are some topic ideas that I have. And you can see like these topic ideas are all very specific and are going to show something that's specific and relevant for their audience. That is something that I have a unique perspective on and can speak to that maybe no one else could, or few people could specifically. And so I have a unique take and angle on something, and hopefully that'll help me stand out, because it's not going to do me any favors to have a generic pitch to say, I'd love to do an episode about SEO or marketing or growth hacking. I'm specifically talking about like having a successful product hunt launch and going #1, which is very specific and actionable, and people tend to like that in podcasts. Next up, so first I have the pitch of the podcast topics, then I have the pitch of me, and basically I try and make my bullet points speak to my topic points above. So in me showing why I would be a good guest, I basically want to illustrate that I can back up these topics and provide something interesting content-wise. And then that's basically it. That's really the meat of what my pitch is.
That's great. Wow, I feel bad about showing mine. I mean, it got
No,
really good results, but
you get a better like what matters is the response rate, and yours is better. So
all right.
yeah, do you want to share yours now?
I'll share my screen. Yeah. So this is the one that this might be beginner's luck. That's just what I want to say. My absolutely beginner's luck.
You are being modest.
So the first one, same subject line, podcast guest, ? Hey there, or hey, contact name, love your podcast, or the name of the podcast. I think I listened to episode 2 3 times already. The reason I say episode 2 is because every podcast has at least 2. So I said I didn't want to say 1, I want to say 2. I think my CEO, name of the CEO, would be a great guest for you. He built translations company from the ground up to a 7-figure business, and he started going door to door himself, asking if people needed any translation services. If you have any guest slots open in April, let me know if you're interested, and happy to answer any questions you may have, and looking forward to meeting you. I think the reason why this works, I think it works more. The reason why I think it works is because of this right here, the love your podcast. That doesn't sound like a bot sending you a message. That sounds very human, very excited girl. Hey, I really, really love this podcast. I think we could be best friends and get on a podcast together. I think that's what sort of
part of it is like in your pitch, you want to sound human, right? And so many bad pitches are kind of void of emotion and not personal. Like when you showed me this, I was like, wait, what? I I'm curious. Has anyone called you out on this and said like, oh, you liked episode number 2? What about episode number 2?
As a few did. I think 2 or 3 people did that, and I was like, I love this part. Like I really fast listened to that on Spotify, and I said, I really love this one. Oh, great. Okay, let's come on board. They really responded to this. I think it's because they're not used to seeing this type of excitement about a podcast. So it sounds, that's the thing. I think it sounds human. I think that's if you can tweak the typical, I found your podcast on Spotify, or I found your website on Google. If you can tweak that typical where I found you sentence, and make it a little bit more human, you'll get some more really human, really excited replies. In fact, most of the people that answered here were, oh wow, yeah, thank you. I've been doing this for ages. I'm really happy that people like it. Like it sounds like a big fan saying, hey, I actually think maybe I could guest in your show because I really like it. And then I had one follow up, which was, sorry for my voice, by the way, I'm a little sick. I had one follow up, which was, hi Contra, hi there. Hello, hey there. Just wanted to follow up and see if you're looking for a new potential podcast guest, if you'd be able to feature Sean. Forgot to plug it. I would be happy to promote your podcast to our audience as well. This one actually, it's interesting. This one got the most replies.
Huh.
And it wasn't sorry, this sequence, it was the first email that got more replies this time, but it wasn't that sophisticated. Usually when I get really good replies in posts, or something that I do is I have a little line that I can show you later. I have a document where I store all of this stuff. I have a little line that goes, we can promote this podcast with our, something that blew my mind was that people were really interested in our Twitter audience. We didn't really have a big Instagram or Facebook. We had a really big Twitter account. It was 17,000 people or something like that. And that was our biggest social media. So I said, if you feature me in the podcast, feature my CEO on the podcast, we can promote the episode with our 70,000 Twitter audience. And a lot of people were like, yeah, sure. No. I've done that a lot with link building campaigns. And that seems to, a lot of people seem to like that. Instead of putting a link back to their post, they like that we just share the article. So yeah, that's worked really well. But yeah, I'll send you the template. I think the reason why mine worked was the first line sounds like a fan of your show that's like, actually I think my CEO could be a great guest as well. It sounds human. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, one thing that you had mentioned about like the like that offer of like, I'm happy to share it with our audience as well. That's often something that I include also. And like just the reciprocity of that, the sense that it's not that like I'm looking to be a guest on your podcast so I can reach your audience, but I'm happy to share the episode with my audience as well. So it's a win-win for everybody. Like, I mean, you're like, you are doing them a favor in that you are helping them create content for their show, and hopefully it'll be a great show and it'll be amazing. But offering to go that extra mile of promoting it to your audience as well just shows that you care more. And every podcast wants you to promote their podcast. No matter like how big or small your audience of followers is, just the token offer of saying I'm happy to share it with my subscribers or anything like that, I think goes a long way in helping.
Yeah, I agree. And that last line, remember, we both have that last line of happy to answer any questions. Just basically let them know, hey, whatever you need, I'm here. What you want to know about the guest. So that's important to
add. Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about now what to expect. So some things that we've gotten, sometimes they'll ask you for what episodes of shows that you've been on. Belle, do you want to talk about this answers doc?
Yeah, I do have that. Yeah, you can open. So I had that, again, I forgot to change that. Anyway, I had that sort of doc. I kind of improved it a little bit here. It's okay. I changed it already. You can stay there a little bit. What I have is usually they will ask a podcast that he's been on. They will ask for the topics, obviously, and I decided to make sort of a cheat sheet for myself on topics he can speak about, communicating with a multicultural team, unique ways to learn and maintain proficiency in several languages, depending on the podcast. Those topics work or not work, right? Our social, so that they could check it out. Pictures of this person, and the best picture, because they will always ask you for a nice professional picture. So I kind of had this cheat sheet just so that what sometimes something they'll ask is, what is it about this guy that makes, what is it about you or about this person that makes them worthy of our podcast? And usually you want to have an answer for that. And you also said something that about a 2-sentence bio. They do ask for that as well. I have like a long version and a short version, but it's really important to have like sort of this document as a cheat sheet of the stuff that they'll probably ask. They'll probably ask for your other social accounts and how big they are. So just make sure you have those numbers there. Make sure you have all the episodes with the links where that person or you have been featured on. Make sure you just have everything there. And if you can include it, like you already do this, and if you can include it already in the first pitch, like the topics and where have you been before and why you would be a great guest, the better. The more you give them, the better. The more professional you look, and the less work they have to do. Basically, to make their jobs really easy, because the bigger the podcasts are, the more you have one person doing all the communication with the potential guest, and the easier you can make her or his job, the better you look.
Yeah, and like every podcast typically needs the same things. They all need a high-res headshot for any of their like media that they do. If they do any like social media cards or things like that, or for like a featured image or anything like that. They also will, like everyone wants a 2-sentence bio. They want links to your site, links to your socials, so they can mention you and when they share their things on socials. And so like I think the cheat sheet is great. I don't have a cheat sheet. I do have I do have like a go-to bio. I do have all my relevant docs and stuff saved like that I can easily access, but I'm taking something from this. I'm going to make my own quick cheat sheet. It'll save me time.
I usually had that open when I was replying to people on the podcast.
Yeah. So that's really good to have. Some other things, some podcasts, not a lot, but some if they respond to you, will say that they only do sponsorships for guests. I have found that it's not that common. Like if you're doing outreach for like link building, it's very common that people will ask you for money. But for podcasts, it's not very common.
I haven't found that yet. Yeah.
I've had a few where they like they're like, oh, we don't we have a sponsorship package, and we can have you on as a guest, and you can have access to our tens of thousands of followers and our audience of subscribers and all that. But yeah, not common, but it has happened to me sometimes. So that's just something to be aware of.
But yeah, that's another benefit of podcasts. Then it's the fact that you're much less likely that you'll get asked for money.
For sure. But yeah, like Bella and I are saying, what to expect. So the response rate, if you follow everything that we're saying today, the response rate is going to be higher than what you'd see from other outreach, cold outreach types of campaigns. I can't recommend trying this enough. So let's talk about some kind of mistakes that people make. Like I mentioned before, reaching out to dead podcasts, having too broad or general a pitch that doesn't really quite fit the podcast. Like if you spend the time to prospect and find particular podcasts, make sure that they are all on a specific theme, so that you can have a pitch that's tailored,
more customized,
like that fits them. Like you wouldn't necessarily want to reach out to marketing podcasts or like paid search related podcasts when you're reaching out to SEO focused podcasts, let's say, because the topics are going to be different. And so you don't want to say like, oh, I'd love to talk about marketing. And it's like, okay, well, that does cover all the bases, but it's not very specific. And I don't love that.
You want to have a slightly different pitch per vertical, and in a specific, as small as those audiences for each campaigns can be, the better, because the more specific you can actually be with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I had mentioned before, don't just focus on why you would be a great guest and don't just recite your resume. The goal here is to provide valuable content for their audience, and that's what they're going to be thinking about. So you need to really frame your pitch from that perspective as well. And then not being prepared with the answers to the questions they're going to ask.
That's why you have a cheat sheet.
Oh, you have a cheat sheet. And then not following up. I've seen a lot of people who just send one email and like, all right, I spent a lot of time on it. And I've reached out to these people and like, okay, I've gotten some responses, but I would be hoping for more. And why haven't I? Just simply, you need to follow up. You have 2 or 3 follow-up emails. That'll better ensure that you get a positive reply. People are busy, and so having a follow-up just to nudge them brings you top of mind and increases the likelihood that you get a good response. Oh, and so before we dive into this, yeah, was there anything else that you wanted to share from your screen, or all good?
I can share. I'll share a more polished version of a cheat sheet if they want, just so they know which kinds of things they'll get asked for. I think that can be valuable, and I'll also share the templates that I used. But I'm interested. I haven't been in podcasts. You've been in podcasts. I'm really interested in what you're gonna speak about next.
Yeah. So I in the last year, I think I've done like 20 to 20. I lost count. I definitely was keeping count at the beginning. And I was like, all right, I'm gonna make my own personal webpage with all my appearances on it, and it'll be a nice like resume kind of site. And then at some point, I just lost count of it all. But I think it's
been
like
so many. I just can't keep counting.
Like not trying to humble brag too much, but like it works. I've been on more recently. I was on the Mixergy podcast, which is a huge entrepreneurship podcast, which was terrifying because that was the only podcast I'd been on where they had a pre-interview with like someone else who worked for the podcast team. This is not common. Out of the 20, let's say 24 podcasts I was on, maybe 3 of them in total had, I guess maybe 3 or 4 of them in total had me speak with the host beforehand on like a Zoom call just to talk about, to plan what we would discuss and things like that. But that was the only one where I spent an hour getting interviewed by like a producer who is trying to figure out what the right take or approach would be for our actual interview. That was scary. But all right, you've gotten accepted to be on a podcast. Great. What should you do? What can you do to make it the best possible podcast? So a few things, and that will really help you stand out. First thing seems kind of simple, but like there are checklists that I get from a lot of podcasts saying like, make sure you have this, this, and this. The number one thing is a strong internet connection, because they're going to be recording you typically over Zoom or Squadcast or any of these platforms. And if your internet's dropping or not great, then it's going to sound bad and it's not going to be a good product. And the host is like, what do I do with this? Because there's only so much they can do with clipping audio or anything like that. So typically what podcasters will ask you to do, and I don't know if everyone has the capability to do this, but like have a wired internet connection. So plug your computer like directly, have a wire connected directly to your router or modem or what have you, so you have the best possible connection and making sure nothing drops. Or if you're going to be wireless, be in the same room if you can where your modem or router are. Yeah, internet connection is super important just because we really need the audio quality to be good. And speaking of that, a good microphone really helps. So like if you can, like podcast hosts typically, they don't love if you have if you're using your onboard mic on your laptop or something like that, because it picks up a lot, especially if your room that you're recording in is a room which has echo, so since they really, really care about audio quality, you can invest in like a $50 microphone, or if you really want to go all out, like $100 microphone, which I use a Blue Yeti microphone, and I think the quality has been very good. I think I was $100. I also have a pop filter, so my P's don't sound weird or anything like that in the recordings. Yeah, I use that. They don't typically care, like audio is like the biggest thing. Some podcasts will record video for using for like clips for social, for like later to like have teasers for it. It's not necessarily the most important, but some of them will record video, or but like it's nowhere near as important, your video quality, as compared to the audio, for sure. But have decent lighting and video if you can. What I also, aside from having a okay webcam, I also have this ring light. Yeah, if you see now, the light is off, and now I look garbagey, and now I look beautiful. So I think the lighting helps a little bit.
And that helps too if you want to join us on our next webinar about the cat influencer.
For our next week's webinar on making your cat an influencer on YouTube, it's very important that your lighting is good.
Bring your own ring light.
Yeah. Another thing, typically what I do before appearances, I will I'll restart my computer, put my phone in airplane mode, close every other app on my computer, make sure that I'm not going to get any notifications, close Slack, close Skype, close any app on my computer that could ping me for any reason, because I don't want to get a note, like a text notification or anything like that in the middle of the recording. And I'm prepared. So for the first podcasts that I was doing on a given topic, I would prepare bullet points of like the things that I wanted to make sure that I covered during the appearance, to make sure that we had a good flow, to make sure that it would be to make sure that like I could deliver the value that I wanted to deliver, and make sure that I didn't miss anything. So that would be important as well. Also, I would try to show up to the podcast a few minutes early. The podcasters generally appreciated that, me not being late and me valuing and honoring their time as well. And then after the podcast is released, after they launch it, they'll typically tag you in social posts and email you to let you know that it's live. I'll then go and schedule my own social posts or emails to let people know I was on this podcast, just to show, really deliver on what I said I would do, which would be promoting it to my audience as well. And that, will help you, build a relationship with this podcast. And so hopefully for the future, there could be other collaboration opportunities, and by you showing that you're going that extra mile for them, because not every guest is going to spend the time to take a few minutes to tweet or post or share or anything like that. That'll help you stand out as well. So now let's just talk about next steps. If you haven't yet, recommend joining our Facebook group all about outreach and SEO and digital marketing, called Grow Together SEO. If you haven't yet, check out Postaga, which can help you with all of your podcast outreach campaigns at postaga.com. We also do demo webinars pretty regularly as well, and you can grab a demo spot if you like. We're happy to go through and give recommendations specifically for your business also. Belle, you have anything you want to plug?
If you're a SaaS founder, apply to join at startupsauce.com. We have a really, really good community of founders like Andy that are just constantly sharing their expertise, and they're just really cool people. So that's
startupsauce.com.
It's the saucers. We're working on the name for our members.
Nice. And I would absolutely, if you are a startup founder, I would definitely recommend checking out the group. It's been really great. I've been getting a lot of good advice and tips for running and growing a business, so I can't recommend that highly enough. next, before we wrap up here, let's do some Q&A. A question from Justin for that I think that's the last one we have time for. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. Any general niche that is commonly accepted by big podcasters or topics that are attractive to them? So, I mean, big podcasters in particular are going to be more challenging in that the way that you're probably going to get through to them is through people they know. So that's all about relationships. So like if you if you want to appear on like a very big popular marketing podcast, if you're on first on a marketing podcast with like a smaller audience and they happen to know that other podcaster, like if they've been a guest on that podcast or vice versa, you might be able to ask that host, hey, can you introduce me to this person? That would probably be the best way to get that to happen. So
yes, I agree. The bigger they get, the more it is about connections.
Yeah, and when you're pitching them, like is like I guess the question, like any general niche, that's attractive to big podcasters. So when you're pitching a big podcast, like in particular, I would spend a lot more time coming up with some personalized approach for it. You want to really demonstrate that you know their audience, because it's going to be like a high value opportunity for you. So see what episodes they've done before, maybe where there's a gap that you have some expertise in that you think that would be good for their audience in particular. But like, yeah, if you're trying to reach out to like a huge podcast, like I said before, like, I don't know, Joe Rogan or Tim Ferriss or anyone like that, they have bookers that are on staff, producers on staff. And the best way that you're gonna be able to reach out and connect with them and get any credibility is through relationships, through people who know them. So what you may want to do is like look at their guests, see who they've had, and if any of them are podcasters, pitch them, be on their podcast, and ask for an introduction if you can. So like work your way up there. And I have like as I mentioned before, any podcast that I'm on, I try and suggest to them, hey, like this was great. Is there any other podcasters that you recommend that I get in touch with? And typically, like they're happy to recommend people.
Yeah.
Other question is, can we get slides or replay? Yes. After we wrap up, we will publish the replay, and so we'll send that to you. Everyone will have a copy of the replay. And so I think that's going to wrap it up for us today. Belle, as any podcaster is going to ask at the end of a podcast episode, where can people find you?
Well, no, you can definitely find me on startupsauce.com. That's where I spend most of my time as a CMO. So you if you apply there, I will probably have a chat, and that's where you can find me. But something that I wanted to hammer on before we leave then is we spoke about this a lot, finding people that have an audience that's similar to yours but a very different offer. Those are the people that you'll be able to really pitch to properly and with a good unique offer. So we've had a lot of great tips, but I think if you want to live with something, live with that one. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Belle, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, man. This is great.
This has been great. I've been excited to finally get you on a webinar. Just super excited about like these now. Every time like we talk about outreach campaigns, there's always something new that I'm learning. I'm like, oh wow, I can't believe it. I haven't thought of this approach or this angle, and so I'm glad to be able to share with everyone.
What Postdog allows you to do is just try different things and switch different things, and then see all the results for every experiment that you run. So if you're a big nerd, it's perfect. That's why I love it so much.
Thanks. That's the great endorsement. I gotta put that somewhere. If you're a big nerd. All right. Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining in the audience. We will be sharing a replay and slides soon. You should get an email from us probably tomorrow with all of that. So if you have any questions, otherwise, please feel free to reach out. We're at postdaga.com, and you'll get an email from me soon. So thanks, everyone.